David Cameron has set out his government's plans to defeat what he is calling the poison of Islamist extremism in Britain today. He pledged to tackle what he's calling the failures of integration, which have seen hundreds of British citizens joining militant groups like Islamic State, so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. The Prime Minister says many youngsters appear to have been drawn into ideology by what he has described as non-violent extremists.
It may begin with hearing about the so-called Jewish conspiracy and then develop into hostility to the West and fundamental liberal values, before finally becoming a cultish attachment to death. Put another way, the extremist worldview is the gateway, and then violence is the ultimate destination.
That's the Prime Minister speaking today in his Birmingham speech. Let's have a word with Abdullah al Andalusi, the co-founder of the Muslim Debate Initiative, and Jeffrey Donaldson, DUP MP. He's also on the line. Welcome to both of you. Abdullah, can I go to you first? Give me your reaction to what the Prime Minister has said today.
Well, it's pretty much the same as what he said previously reiterated. He announced a few small new measures, but it's just a reiteration of the same rhetoric based on flawed understanding of both social and political realities, as well as theological realities of Islam. And he's really just, I feel, preparing the public to implement a raft of new, very draconian and impositional regulations which will control and limit free speech in Britain, and also control and limit the rights and freedoms of the Muslim community in the UK.
All right, so that which is new in there, you think is draconian?
Well, I think that most of the things that he said is quite concerning, especially concerns limits to free speech and limits to the right to belief and the right to hold a livelihood without suffering for one's belief. So I think that this is pretty much the same stuff which has been said before by both David Cameron and Theresa May, but it has been rehashed into a speech, and only a few things have newly been introduced, like, for example...
Well, let's get to that, because I don't think you can have it both ways, Abdullah, and say it's all the same, but there's new stuff that's draconian, because it's the new stuff we're interested in. For example, a strengthened role for Ofcom to enable that organisation to take action against channels which broadcast extremist content. And so, for example, we have a definition of extremism as part of this new strategy, which defines extremism as vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values. And some people would say, well, shouldn't you have the freedom to express an opposition to some values that you struggle with? There are new powers in here to close premises where extremists seek to influence others. There's new extremism disruption orders to restrict people who seek to radicalise young people. That's part of the strategy over a period of 5 years, Jeffrey Donaldson. Is the Prime Minister heading in the right direction with this strategy?
Well, I can go some of the way with Abdullah in terms of the need to better understand the nature of the extremism that we are dealing with. And I agree that we can't just deal with that by use of the big stick. And I think that there needs to be a twin approach to this. We need to be countering the narrative, and we need to understand what influences young Muslims to get involved in extremist activity, what encourages them to go all the way to Syria and Iraq and join the forces there. Because I think until we do properly understand that, we won't begin to address it in a proper way. And I think when you look at Northern Ireland in the early 1990s, and the campaign that was run at that time by the Northern Ireland office, the advertising campaign, which after a lot of research was designed to address the mindset that applied at that time, to challenge people about the notion that there was any acceptable level of violence, that terrorism was in any sense justified. And that campaign was very, very successful, and the evidence is there to back that up, that a lot more people, as a result of those adverts, came forward, gave information to the police, cooperated and helped to bring the IRA in particular to a ceasefire. So I think we can learn something from the Northern Ireland situation, but we need to understand what it is we're dealing with.
And can we learn from the Northern Ireland situation, Jeffrey, that it's actually strategically foolhardy to try to shut down speech?
And we did try that in Northern Ireland, and frankly, it didn't work. I don't think that will work in the UK context in any way. People have access to so many different types of media these days that it's impossible to control that situation. What I think you do need to do is be countering the narrative, the extremist narrative. You need to be winning the battle for hearts and minds. And I know that sounds cliched, but it is true. It's a psychological battle here that we're dealing with, and therefore we need to be one step ahead of that. And really, we're not at the moment.
Abdullah, if you were advising David Cameron, what would you suggest to him that he should be doing?
Well, basically, the policies that he outlined, the ones you mentioned about Ofcom, about the ability to shut down residences if they host extremist speakers, these things have been said before since, I believe, late 2014. So that's why I said there was nothing new. My advice to David Cameron is really make a choice between the claimed British values he touts and whether he really wants to deal with being sincere to the people, British people who he's sworn to protect. And in that matter, it's very unwise to outlaw or effectively outlaw theological concepts by a secular state. So a secular state getting involved in the theological concepts and ideas of a minority and dictating to them what is acceptable belief and what is it not acceptable belief. And just to give you an example of a dangerous logic behind this.
I'd like to see an example of that. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, he says that non-violent extremism is a gateway to violence. And it has been mentioned by other government authorities that, for example, and by David Cameron himself, that caliphate is one of these extreme ideas. And he said that it's a gateway, or in other cases, it is closer, it's a smaller leap between belief in that to violence. But the fallacy in that is I could equally posit that belief in Islam is a shorter leap from that to joining ISIS, for example. So then should we outlaw Islam or fight against Islam by the same logic? Or perhaps even the Christian belief about homosexuality, one could show that that's a shorter leap between that and, let's say, persecution of gays in Uganda or attacks against gay nightclubs in USA, is the Christian belief about abortion, mostly the Catholic belief. Does that lead to violence too? So if we want to play this game, pretty soon you'll be outlawing religion itself. And even and animal rights beliefs and a whole number of other beliefs, because at one point or another, all beliefs, or many beliefs, have had people who've taken these beliefs and have become violent with it, including feminism, like the suffragettes, for example. So we have to be very careful when we talk about non-violent beliefs. The vast majority of people who believe in the beliefs that David Cameron has, without authority, declared to be extremist, are peaceful and are productive members of UK society from the minorities that he's directing this at. And I think that this fact has been forgotten. And because we forget this fact, it's going to lead to a lot of injustices, I believe, against people's basic rights.
Jeffrey Donaldson, we did hear Nicky Morgan, the Education Secretary, a while ago, giving an example of what she would regard as an alert within a school context. If a child voiced an anti-gay view, for example, she might see that, she says, as an alert sign that you may see the beginnings of extremism there. I guess that's what Abdullah is saying. We have to be very careful that we give free speech to people to voice sometimes views which are unpalatable to others, but are nevertheless within a theological tradition.
And I would hope, William, that is one of the British values that David Cameron speaks of, the freedom of speech. That's been a very important value at the heart of our democracy over many decades and indeed centuries. I don't think that what we want to be doing is outlawing people from expressing their faith position. I think what we need to do is challenge the notion that it is in any way legitimate to kill for your faith, and that the extension of your belief is that you need to take the life of others in pursuit of that faith. That is what's wrong. That's what we need to challenge. That doesn't mean you prevent people from having beliefs and having a faith. And what you need to do is challenge the notion that it is legitimate in any circumstances to kill someone in pursuit of that belief, in pursuit of, or as the fulfillment of that faith. And I think that's where we need to be making the challenge.
Let's take a call. Danny's there. Hi, Danny.
Hello there.
Hey, Danny, what do you think?
Go ahead.
What do you think?
I'm thinking about the Muslim community. When they first came here, I remember when maybe say 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
Oh, we had Muslims in Britain in the 19th century.
Well, they came here and they went to a British school and they were educated in everything except religion. So as the years went on, I think they wanted their own schools. So they got their own schools. So the next thing that happens, boys were separated from the girls. This is only lately here. It was all in the news. And all I want to teach is religion, religion, religion.
OK, sorry, Danny, we're really nearly out of time. I want to give Abdullah a very quick response to that. That idea of separation of gender is troubling for people who say it's not consistent with British values.
Well, I find that risible, considering that our sports segregate genders, our toilets segregate genders. You can have single-sex schools like Eton, where a lot of these politicians were educated, and yet when it comes to a religious community, this is not allowed. And Muslims are not the only religious community who has been known to practice gender segregation. So I think there's a double standard here.
Abdullah, thank you very much. And thanks to Jeffrey Donaldson as well. Abdullah al Andalusi is the co-founder of the Muslim Debate Initiative. Jeffrey Donaldson, as you know, DUP MP.